We have two scriptures this morning. The first is the the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24. The coming of the promised one will be just like Noah's time. In the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, having relationships and getting married, right up to the day Noah entered the ark. They were totally unconcerned until the flood came and destroyed them. The next is from the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 10. It was wisdom who kept guard over our first parents, the founders of the human race, when they alone were created. And after they sinned, it was she who rescued them and gave them the power to direct all things. It was because of one unjust person who renounced her that in a fit of rage, he murdered his own brother and so became accursed. Because of the consequences of this fault, the world was engulfed in a flood. But again, wisdom came to the rescue and taught one just person to steer a wooden craft through the raging waters. Ancient words for our present day consideration.
I'm still kind of in shock from the impeachment. You just get used to a certain kind of leadership in Texas, and to see somebody being held to account for something is kind of an amazing kind of thing. I know a lot of people, when they look at what has become of our country, what's become of our state, there's a kind of a depression that sets in. And you just want to see it or hear it. And that's absolutely human, that's very understandable. Has anybody here ever been approaching a wreck that you were maybe causing or caught up in, and took up the strategy of closing your eyes? I've not found it to be incredibly helpful in avoiding collisions. It's like, however bad the wreck's gonna be, facing with your eyes open is pretty good advice, I think, for the most part. And I think that looking at our civic life, our civil relationships, it's really important both to accept how hard it is to do, how brutalizing it is sometimes. We need to rest, we need to breathe, we need to do all that kind of stuff. But when we check out of what is happening, again, very understandable, very human thing to do. But does that take us where we want to be as human beings? Earlier this week, I was with some families from Uvalde and just some activists who were mourning and grieving that situation. And I had an experience that I often have with activists, in that the people that feel most hopeless about it usually aren't that involved in it. And again, it's kind of a human thing. To stand on the sidelines is in and of itself depressing. It's in and of itself a helpless feeling when you see that kind of situation. But to see parents who've had the worst thing that could happen possibly to a human being, to lose a child, and yet finding the strength to want to save anyone else from that same pain. That's amazing to me. Those are the kind of people I want to be with, and that's sort of what has been my experience in the life of activism. The traumatized, the survivors, find a strength for each other they can't find for themselves. I believe despair is a mistake. There was a saying in revolutionary movements of Central and South America: it's better to die on your feet than live on your knees. And I think people of privilege don't realize that we're making that decision every day. To stand with our human family, to live out of that calling that is most noble in our heart, or just to hunker down so we're not next. In the religion of Zoroastrianism, one of the interesting things for me was to discover that they had an unforgivable sin. Because Christianity talks about that unforgivable sin, but it doesn't really get real specific about what that is. But in Zoroastrianism, you know what I'm trying to say. Zoroastrianism. Despair is the unforgivable sin. Because when we quit on our human family, when we shut down the part of us that calls us to nobility, there's nothing outside of us that can help us. We have to open that door again from within. So we can look at ourselves in the mirror and see something we want to see. As I try to say once a month, none of us gets out of here alive. And I just don't think most people realize that. And we keep saying, if anything ever happens to me. See, the question is, the most important, after you've been born, you've learned how to chew food and all that, maybe the most important question for you is what you're going to give the rest of your life to. Are you going to live and die for something? Or are you going to die of something? Those are really our two choices, right? We give our lives to our highest cause, or it gets taken from us by time. So what I want to suggest is, there is a way we can live that gives us hope and courage and power and joy within the storm, within the struggle. None of us can do all of it. All of us have to rest. There's nothing wrong with checking out from time to time. That's a Sabbath. But when we've given up our hope for humankind, for our human family, there's a poverty that's in our heart that nothing else can compensate for. So today we're going to look at two different Bible verses. This whole series we're doing that. But we're going to look at the Christian text that you've heard before, probably. That when the Messiah comes again, it'll be like when Noah was here. And we're going to look at the Sophia passages. Now, those are not in the Protestant Bible. They're not in the Presbyterian tradition. But I think we understand Christianity a whole lot better if we go back to those passages that were written in between the two testaments that we have in our Bible. They're there in the Catholic Church, they're in mysticism. And Jesus is quoting these passages on a repeated basis. We understand Christianity a whole lot better if we realize Jesus wasn't talking about himself. He was talking about this cosmic wisdom that weaves us together. So when he says, only me, and I do this, I'm that, he's not a narcissist. I was taught a fairly narcissistic Jesus. Grovel before me, and then, then I'll let you in the gated community of heaven. Unless you do something wrong, or you don't recognize how much I love you, in which case I'll torture you for all eternity. Sleep well. When we look at these passages and we look at the parables of Jesus, what gets really clear is there are different ways to look at the sacred. One way is to look at it in terms of power, which is typically what we've done if we've been taught that God is a boy. God makes people like a pot. Adam and Eve made a mistake. They ate fruit, which is a horrible, horrible thing. Don't never do that. And now you have cancer because what Adam and Eve did. It's insane. But if you're afraid enough of hell, you won't look at that. Now, if you've been coming to St. Andrews for a while, you know you can't trust preachers. Right?
Amen.
Amen. Amen. My job is to help you feel your own wisdom. Right? The Sophia passages, the reason Jesus taught in parables is because he wasn't trying to indoctrinate us. He was trying to awaken us, empower us, encourage us. Think of the difference when you look at the sacred as a male magical power boy versus if it's truth, just what's true. We'll come back to that in a second. But I think the difference it makes is the difference between thinking, okay, I've got to fight evil the rest of my life. That's exhausting. That's exhausting. I've got to focus on all this ugliness and combat it. Versus loving so much that I become a first responder for my human family. Think how different the idea of the sacred. I love that verse in the Christmas hymn. I've never been able to do it justice in a sermon. Joy to the world. Christ has come. God rules the world with truth and grace. What a powerful way to look at the sacred in our lives. It's not dominating us. It's more us resonating to it. And then it guides us, it leads us. In the chapter we're looking at, in Wisdom of Solomon, the author goes through, and it wasn't really Solomon, right? You understand that you can't take religion at face value. Right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are not the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the story of Jesus. Right? The timing is off. They're coming too late to do that. This is not the Solomon who spoke Hebrew, because this is written in Greek. It talks about the fall, not as a lack of obedience, but a rejection of wisdom. Rejection of the way of nature. It talks about Cain killing Abel as a rejection of this wisdom that's woven into life. And it says that unleashes evil in the world. Injustice unleashes a flood of evil in the world. It's not that God is sitting there punishing everybody. Instead, the sacred is whispering to us to lead us. And it says that with this flood of evil and injustice, Sophia, our sacred wisdom, was there whispering and guiding Noah to build this craft to get through the storm. I like one of the translations that said, led him through the flood on a plank of wood. I like that. I also like the fact the flood myth is taken from Babylonian sources. Epic of Gilgamesh. And in that story, the person who's the hero of the flood story has to tear down his own house to build a boat. I like that better. Because what it's saying is we need to change our life around. We have to be transformed to get through the flood. But we can get through the flood. And we can do it with joy, we can do it with peace, with compassion. The word Noah in Hebrew means to rest. And the story is, had this storm, it finally rests on the mountaintop. But I think there may have been a play on words, because in Greek, the word Noah means mind. I don't know that, I've not seen that in a commentary, so put a whole lot of salt on that. But consider the fact that heaven is not a place. If it were a place, you wouldn't have to teach it with parables. You just give people a map. right? But you can't get there like that. So in this passage, it talks about the kingdom of God, and this is before Christianity. And it's not a place, it's a condition of the spirit, the soul. A place in the heart that's tuned to the way of life. The second step that I think is really important in understanding the gift that this ancient mystic is trying to give us comes down to the word, and it gets very confusing. The translation word, in the beginning was the word. You have to believe the word, is a terrible translation. Greek had a different word for that kind of word. In the Greek tradition, logos meant a pattern of things. I think Sophia is the Hebrew kind of equivalent from a feminine viewpoint. But the key thing to realize about that word logos that you see in Christianity, see, in the beginning was the word. You see it in the early church all over the place. It doesn't mean you're supposed to believe the words in the Bible. What good does that do you? How many people have fought against science and justice because there was a verse in the Bible that they were taking literally? The word that's being talked about is whatever that creative principle that gives you birth. It comes up through life, through nature, through the universe, and you can live it, you can express it. That's the word that gives life. Not something in a book. The thing in the book is pointing to that. It's trying to help you get to that. But the church robs you when we make ourselves the toll gate to get to the word. So you were born with that. And all religion can do is maybe be helpful to hearing it. Heraclitus was the philosopher that coined the word logos. He said everything is change in the whole world. It's chaos, change. But there has to be a principle by which things change. And that is your home. That is peace. When you tune yourself to the heart of creation, heart of life, then you're at home wherever you are. In chaos theory, it comes very close to this kind of an idea, that in chaos, you can't predict it, but there's a pattern there that you can relate to, no matter how complicated or insane it seems. The example of that would be if you went to Las Vegas. Has anybody said, you get a free trip to Las Vegas, you said, no, it's so meaningless, it's random. Right? Cards are random, dice are random. No, thank you. I mean, people go to Las Vegas because that's exciting. Randomness is not our enemy. But there are principles. Let's say cards. Let's say after church, we're going to have a bridge tournament. And some of you know how to play bridge. You know the principles of bridge. And poor little Jimmy's going to show up, and you're going to clean my clock. Same cards, same randomness. How is it that an expert at bridge can take random cards and win? It's the same way with life. You don't need a macho God. You don't need a Santa God. You need to get in touch with whatever this sacred wisdom is. Whatever this sacred creativity that births you. That's something you can live out of. The wonderful thing about in chaos theory, one of the things they talk about is the butterfly effect, where a butterfly flapping its wings can start a hurricane somewhere else. I don't know if that's true 100%, but what it's saying is little beginnings can have epic consequences. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to say. Your life matters, even if you cannot see the effect that you're having on the world. Remember Robert Kennedy, not the one that's running for president, but the one before that, saying that every human act is like throwing a pebble in the pond. You never know where the ripples are going to end. That's a very hopeful way to live. It's the opposite of that kind of despair. So I have one more idea I want to share with you. And that is, I think that this passage is telling us that wisdom can lead us through the storm. Not in some childish way. You'll still have the same problems, but you'll be coming from a deeper place that will give you a context. If you think about it, without the chaos, there are parts of yourself that can never be expressed or discovered. You cannot find your courage unless you're faced with something that frightens you. You think you have, but until you get that diagnosis or until your kid gets a car, you can't really deal with that. Until you're dealing with confusion and you can't find a shape or a boundary, it's really hard to know what wisdom is. It's like a tea bag. You really don't know what the flavor is until it's put in boiling water. And I think that's what the mystics have been trying to tell us. Chaos is not your enemy. Randomness is not your enemy. When you're afraid, it feels like hell. When you accept it, and Las Vegas is a bad example. I've never been there. I won't pretend to have a whole lot of desire to go there. But I do like games. I like adventure. I like being surprised. I think that's what it's saying. That God isn't a reluctant genie up in the sky. It's a constant presence that you live within, that you don't have to go searching for, you don't have to beg. It's a gift that's free, that's given to you. That sacred something is talking to you all the time. And the only reason you can't hear it is somebody said it's in the Bible. Right? And you're wanting somebody to speak in King James English. Have you ever had a dog jump in your lap and was speaking the language your heart needed? See, when we stop asking the universe to speak our language, we realize it's talking to us all the time. We're not alone. We're not forsaken. We live in this rich tapestry of communication. So Christianity has to move from belief, propaganda, dogma, to this wisdom that's part heart, part head. That you can't really separate it from compassion and caring. When you tune your heart to that word, then you find peace, even through the storm. I understand the temptation to close your eyes when you look out and you see the horrible things happening in the world. But I'm asking you to look at that and say, is this filling my heart? Is this giving me life, or is this what is making me feel dead inside, helpless? The most important question for the rest of your life is how you're going to spend it. What are you going to give it to? Are you going to wait to have it taken from you? Are you going to think and meditate about your highest value and give yourself to that? This word isn't found in any book. It's found in nature, in life, within you, within the stranger. You're not being asked to fight for it. Instead, you're being asked to become a first responder of compassion, love, understanding. And finally, you're giving the assurance that when you tune your heart to that generative principle of the universe, you give your life to that word and you tune your heart to that word, you will find peace, joy, and guidance, even in the worst of storms. Well, that's the best I can get out of this passage. We'll take a minute now for you to think how you would have preached it.